It's October 12, 2012. Police swarm the gymnasium of Sophia University, investigating the potential of a terrorist threat. It was 1:36 p.m. of that same day that a message had appeared on 2chan stating the following: "I hate Tadatoshi Fujimaki, who is now a famous Sophia University alumnus. I wanted to take revenge on Fujimaki himself, but I cannot find his location. I had no other choice but to target here." The threat in question was a mere plastic container that had been left on the second floor of the gym. Though the container in question only contained a strange liquid, with a note attached on top. It simply stated that they hated Tadatoshi Fujimaki. And as they opened the container, it gave off this weird smell of sulfur. Turns out the container was full of hydrogen sulfide solution, a gas known for being highly toxic, flammable, and easy to make at home. According to an insider, there was enough to emit a lethal dose if it was vaporized. But just who was this Fujimaki? Was he a politician, maybe a powerful CEO? After all, Sophia University is one of the most prestigious universities in all of Japan. No, to make matters even more confusing, he was just a mangaka, responsible for the series Kuroko's Basketball that had been growing in popularity at that time. Establishing a motive was near impossible for the public and for the police. Yet the culprit had left behind only one hint. If you ask Fujimaki, you will know who I, the suspect, am. And so the threats continued. Threats of suspicious white powder or liquid were sent to Fujimaki's publisher, the television station behind Kuroko's anime, and even the high school he had attended. But figuring out where the threats were coming from wasn't an easy task. The letters had been sent from multiple different locations throughout Japan, making it incredibly difficult to pin down the culprit's exact location. To make matters even worse, the threats were happening so frequently that organizers were forced to cancel events, with major retailers even removing Kuroko's Basketball merch from their stores. CommonNet alone has supposedly lost more than 10 million yen due to the threats sent there alone. It could be something as large as Jump Festa holding a stage event, or something as minor as a collaboration at a cafe. If it was related to Kuroko's Basketball, you would get a message that would say something along the lines, "If you don't cancel your event, there will be a lot of casualties." By November of 2013, a full year later, the number of letters had risen to 400. However, last month, the police have finally found the clue that they needed. So what was the perpetrator's critical mistake? Maybe a fingerprint left on an envelope or a stray hair left at the scene of the crime. No, it was just a simple backpack. In October, a security camera in 7-Eleven had picked up the culprit wearing a black two-stripe backpack, while spiking a Kuroko's Basketball snack. An investigator had incredibly spotted that same backpack in Osaka Station only 2 months later and had tailed the culprit to Tokyo, confronting him at a postal box to find a backpack full of letters. The suspect had turned out to be a 36-year-old temp worker named Hito Watanabe. And you would think in a situation where your life was over, that you were going to be tried for a crime with overwhelming evidence against you, that you would show some sign of remorse for what you had done. But all Watanabe did was smile. It was an image that was broadcasted all over Japan, one that the public found absolutely disturbing. Everyone had watched Watanabe get put into the back of that car, including a 22-year-old Kenji Yonezu. While everyone was fixated on the horrors of the crimes that Watanabe had committed, there was one comment that had stuck out to the young musician. You see, Watanabe had told the public that he had been wearing a pair of invisible handcuffs his entire life. He was bullied constantly growing up, abused at his own home as a child, and was rejected by everyone he loved for being a homosexual. His life, as he put it, was full of nothing but misery. And those invisible handcuffs that had been imposed on him had been the reason why he could never live a normal life. In the end, Watanabe had never even had any connections to the author. His motive for the crimes was nothing but one of pure jealousy. Here was the successful mangaka with a prestigious academic career and on top of that, have found major success in boys' love derivative works. He had likened the manga to a bully that constantly reminded him of just how hopeless he really was. So as Watanabe walked to that parole car on that cold December day, he said he couldn't help but just smile at the circumstances, because now his invisible handcuffs had been made real. Japan has grown a reputation as a global leader in low crime rate. Criminal offenses have only decreased since their peak in 2002, and according to the nation's police agency, there were only 10 related gun incidents in 2021, within a population of 125 million. The peace, unity, and security that the nation seems to project is perhaps why so many of us feel enamored with its people and culture. But it also might be the very reason why events like these always make global headlines.
We begin with the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Officials are still investigating after a man set fire to an anime studio in Kyoto, killing 33 people.
A nation where gun violence is so incredibly rare.
The attack has shocked people around the world. Japan is one of the world's safest nations and has some of the world's strictest gun control laws.
Perhaps tragedies like these would seem commonplace in the West, but when it happens in a nation like Japan, well, it seems like the world's blood just runs cold. Despite Japan's reputation for low crime rates, one issue that the nation can't seem to overcome are acts of senseless violence. So the question becomes, what's causing it? When Watanabe had his hearing in August of 2014, there was a term that came up that caught my interest. He went on to describe himself as a Muteki no Hito. Now, a direct translation of this to English would be an invincible person. But if you type this into Google, you'll get about 52,000 results. However, in Japan, that number goes up to about 26 million. It is a slang term in Japanese that has risen in popularity drastically over the past couple of years. And Watanabe didn't say it because he viewed himself as an untouchable human being. In fact, far from it. He went on to describe himself as someone who couldn't build relationships with others, someone unable to find a place in society, and had no romantic experience. He was essentially, in his eyes, someone with nothing left to lose. With no meaningful value left in his life, he had hit a state of invulnerability to basic moral values. And you know, maybe there's nothing more terrifying than that. When someone attacks someone in cold blood, at least you know they have something of value to protect or hide. That some part of their humanity is left to acknowledge that their actions were unjustified. But how do you defend yourself against someone with nothing left to lose? June the 8th, 2008, Akihabara, Tokyo. At 12:33 p.m., a 5-ton Renault Isuzu elf truck ignores a red light and proceeds to hit 12 pedestrians crossing the street. As people gather to help the victims, the driver suddenly climbs out and proceeds to stab 12 people with a dagger, according to one witness, screaming during the process. The suspect is then chased by police and backed into a corner, where an officer threatens to shoot him if he doesn't drop the knife. This event would go on to be known as the 2008 Akihabara Massacre. 7 people will lose their lives that day. The culprit was a 25-year-old Tomohiro Kato, a tent worker at an auto parts factory in Shizuoka Prefecture. He had no criminal background prior to the event, and any basic look into his background would actually show a very accomplished student and athlete. His grades were considered exceptional in elementary school, where he was also a top track athlete. When he entered Sakuta Junior High, he even went on to be the president of the tennis club there, where Kato would manage to do even greater things by enrolling in a Mori High School, an elite high school named after that prefecture. But it was here that his life started to spiral out of control. He began acting violently at home after enrolling. His class rank plummeted to 300 out of the 360 students. Then when he failed to pass the entrance exams to the prestigious Hokkaido University, he settled to train as an auto mechanic in Nakanihome Automotive College. It seems so unfathomable that someone with so much potential could have their whole life just pulled away from them so drastically. But it wasn't until an interview with Kato's brother that it was revealed how much pressure their parents had been putting on both of them to perform and excel in their studies. Their mother would often severely punish them for minor mistakes. If one character looked off on an assignment, she would force them to start the paper over from scratch. Kato had stated himself that she would dunk them in the bathtub when they couldn't recite their multiplication tables. Though the abuse seemed to fall outside of just academics, as one night when the family was just sitting quietly eating dinner, his mother suddenly snapped on him and threw his dinner onto a newspaper in the hallway, telling him to eat there instead. While any parent wants their child to succeed, it's fairly clear that both Kato and his brother were under considerable mental and physical abuse. Maybe it's no surprise then that as Kato grew older, the more distant he became with his parents, solemnly ever coming home. It seems the treatment from his parents created a sense of vulnerability and insecurity within him, so the internet had become a sanctuary to escape it. Kato would go on to say, "The internet was a very important place for me, because I could frankly say what I really thought about. I had no one else that could replace the internet. It was my relations on the internet that I really valued." But unfortunately, the internet only seemed to make his mental state worse, as his self-confidence plummeted after a woman he'd been speaking to had ghosted him after sending a photo of himself. He suffered from online bullying on top of that, with people even going as far to impersonate him and post fake messages. On trial, prosecutors had stated he was compelled to commit the murders after moderators had failed to do anything about it, repeatedly threatening to launch an attack if they didn't stop. By launching the attack and having it reported by the media, I wanted them to know that I really wanted them to stop their harassment. There is no way to view the incident on June the 8th as just a mere fit of passion. Kato had posted multiple messages about his plan of attack, had concealed 3 knives on him that day, and had even been waiting for crowds to form as well. It was nothing short of a travesty. No matter what happens in your life, it'll never be an excuse to take it out on those around you. And on June the 26th, 2022, Kato had finally been executed for the crimes he committed almost 15 years ago. I don't sympathize with Kato, but there is a part of me that pities him. I imagine that he saw his life as a spiral of one unfortunate event after another, that being charged with murder was just a fitting conclusion to an unfortunate hand that life had dealt him. And there's a part of me that wonders if he had learned anything within that time. Did he feel any regret for what had happened? Shown any remorse for what he had done? If you read interviews years after the event, it's clear that something must have been changing within him. While awaiting trial, he wrote back to a taxi driver he had injured expressing his remorse. Despite his brother assuming that he must resent his parents strongly for their harsh upbringing, he never blamed his parents once for his own actions, taking full responsibility for the crime. The Mainichi Daily News even quoted Kato saying, "I will talk about anything if it can help prevent a similar incident from happening in the future." There are mass murderers that make my skin crawl, individuals that fill me with loathing and disgust. But for some reason when I look at Tomohiro Kato, I don't get that feeling. I just see a normal guy who made some horrifying decisions. And there's a part of you that wonders if this whole tragedy could have been avoided if someone tried to reach out to him sooner. For me, it lies into one of the biggest debates going on in the world right now. Are these individuals solely to be blamed for their crimes, or are we as a society failing them? Muteki no Hito is said to originate from one individual, Hiroyuki Nishimura, the creator of the Japanese text board 2chan, a site that has garnered more than enough controversy in Japan, like its counterpart 4chan has over here in the West. The site has been popular, for example, among the Neto Uyo, or the net right-wingers, a group known for posting xenophobic comments on the site, particularly against Koreans. By 2008, Hiroyuki has somehow received over 100 lawsuits about defamatory comments left on the site. Then after he acquired 4chan in 2015, the users of that site would go on to birth the QAnon movement, spread false COVID vaccine myths, and even help radicalize mass shooters. To call Hiroyuki controversial would be an understatement at this point, and a large reason seems to stem from his belief of allowing unmoderated discussion on the internet. When it became common knowledge that Kato had been using 2chan to post his information before committing the crime, he simply stated that he is not to be blamed for criminal posts, saying, "That case has nothing to do with us. I don't believe he killed people just because he was annoyed online. He says he doesn't have friends, but it's not surprising that someone like him doesn't have friends. That alone cannot be a reason for murder. It's too simple to think that the internet causes such crimes." Look, regardless of what your stances are on Hiroyuki, or if he even understands basic moral values, something that cannot be denied is his impact and influence on modern day society. He's the inspiration for Christopher Poole starting 4chan. He single-handedly flipped Japan on his head with 2chan, and if his YouTube channel says anything, he still holds a significant place in Japan's current landscape. Many growing up in Japan view him as an icon, with him even going on the top of poll to be the next prime minister among high schoolers. Some of you might be shocked to hear that, but if you lived in a nation where you felt constantly oppressed by rigid rules, a nation that values seniority over its youth, wouldn't you feel inspired by someone who feels so untouchable to the norms that have been set? Perhaps it's no surprise then that Hiroyuki has even been brought on multiple news broadcasts to discuss current events, and of course even the issue of Muteki no Hito. While the concept of the hikikomori has been a popular subject globally, I think it's less often that we discuss the marginalized individuals who choose to take their aggression out on others. Nishimuro specifically states it's time that we face these people who have been ignored. And a large part of his stance to solve the issue is for the government to set up programs that help citizens get back on their feet. He's often been a critic of compulsory education, arguing that attending school doesn't necessarily guarantee a place in society to every student who comes out of it. Instead, there's a need to set up a system that guarantees an individual the ability to earn a decent wage and become a contributing member of society with a basic education. Not only do I agree with Hiroyuki here, but I would also argue that most college graduates probably could as well. How many seniors have told you that they were unable to afford college growing up, but somehow still managed to make it work? That they had a stable life working a blue-collar job after graduating high school. Now the concept of higher education seems almost mandatory, forcing most young adults into crippling debt. But it still begs the question, would offering someone a stable living necessarily make them less dangerous? In 2018, Ichiro Kojima stepped onto a bullet train at 10 p.m. in central Tokyo, where he then proceeded to stab a man to death and attack 2 women. People were using removed seats to defend themselves, but most panicked running for their lives. When police had finally gotten a hold of Kojima, all he merely told them was that he had been frustrated and wanted to kill someone. Kojima, who did not have a good relationship with his parents, was living with his grandmother over in Okazaki, until he left home in December of 2017. According to prosecutors, however, he had found it too difficult to live on his own, and had grown a desire to end up in prison, after living homeless and sleeping outside in parks. This was not a normal act of desperation, however. As Kojima himself has said, he intended to get a life sentence in prison, purposely limiting the number of fatalities to avoid a death penalty, but would strike again if he was sentenced to a definite term. During his trial where he was finally given his wish, a life sentence, he responded that he would not appeal the ruling, then proceeded to chant Banzai while raising his fist, where the trial was promptly closed. Maybe you've already picked up on it, but the difficulty with a case like Ichiro Kojima is his history with mental illness. In fact, according to his grandmother, he had begun living with her after being hospitalized to treat his illness. But unfortunately, he wasn't given a proper psychiatric examination until the prosecution deemed it necessary for the criminal trial, where he was diagnosed with a personality disorder. It's hard to say how much of his motivation had been influenced by it, but situations like Ichiro Kojima show that society's problems can't be solved simply by providing ample work or income. While Japan continues to crack down on weapon use, it might not be the definitive solution to their problem. After all, unfortunately, people will always find a way to hurt others. I would say there's a crucial piece missing in this puzzle instead: a focus on mental health. In Japan, only 6% of people have used psychological counseling for mental health issues. Compare that to the 52% in America and Europe. I think it's important to distinguish, however, that the prevalence of common mental disorders, or CMD, is much lower in Japan than in most countries. While the events such as the ones we have discussed so far are tragic, they are not the norm, and happen far less often than they do in the West. But that doesn't mean it couldn't change in the future. Japan and its relationship with mental health is not something new on this channel, but I think this is a great opportunity to further explore how societal expectations limit us. There is an ingrained belief in Japan that adoring what is unacceptable is a virtue. This is always a value that I've loved about the Japanese. They are a nation who have faced the worst that humanity has to offer, recovered, and have come out stronger from it as a result. It comes from generations taught that we can't control our environment, but we can control our reactions to them.
天が与えた試練というには無すぎるものでした。しかし、苦境にあっても天を恨まず運命に耐え助け合って生きていくことがこれからの私たちの使命です。
The issue is how this often collides with Japan's high value on conformity. No term better illustrates this to me than shogunai. There is no real equivalent in English, but think of it as, it can't be helped. While there are certainly dangers to individualism that the West has demonstrated countless times lately, it does allow us to stand up and express ourselves when we know something is wrong. If you try to cut someone in line here in the States, well, you're lucky if you make it with your hearing afterwards.
Come on, man. Being rude.
But in Japan, most will see the situation as incredibly frustrating, but ultimately tell themselves shogunai and just keep moving. This, of course, isn't to say that every single member of Japanese society won't confront you about the matter, however, but the important thing is that this is a societal norm: to conform, to not make a scene, to adapt. So when you live in a culture where conforming is the standard, where you're taught to endure the hardships happening around you, maybe it's not too surprising that 2/3 of all sufferers never seek out professional help. Many in the country do not believe that mental illness requires professional treatment.
もうおかしな人が行かなきゃいけないところってでそういう人が家の中に出るのは非常に不名誉なことであるとか恥であるとかそういうのもあるのかなと思いますね。
So while the CMD number might be low compared to other countries, who really knows how many cases are just going unreported? Japan's low crime rate in of itself has been a subject of contestment for years now. But to be fair, in my own personal experience, there really wasn't a single point where I felt uncomfortable walking around their cities at night, unlike here in America. But often, crime can happen in forms not easily seen or reported. Domestic violence, sexual assault, white-collar crime. They've all been the subject of criticism for years, particularly by women. In a study done by Mitsutoshi Hori and Adam Burgess studying Chikan, or individuals who commit public groping, they found that 48% of their 155 participants had experienced being groped in public. Most of these participants were young women in their 20s. Now, obviously these numbers could vary with such a small survey size, but I think it should be pointed out that discussion had become big enough about this issue that Japan had to introduce women-only carriages to help fight back. But rather than being a solution to the problem, it only seemed to highlight the government's inability to understand the problems of their people. When Hori and Burgess had finished their study, they found only 7% of the women claimed to use the women-only carriages often. Another 27% had claimed to use them, but not very frequently, while another 39% just straight up did not use them at all, despite the fact that 73% of the participants rode the train 4 or more times a week. It seems the introduction of the carriages assumed the assumption that women in modern-day society can only be safe through confinement, and it's for this very reason that many women in the study just refuse to use them. Cohen argues in her paper that the emergence of segregation is a consequence of persisting male dominance within the public space. Perhaps no case demonstrates this ideology better than Shiori Ito's. In 2017, Ito had put in a report to the Japanese police about being date raped by her co-worker, Noriyuki Yamauchi, a well-known journalist and acquaintance of Shinzo Abe. While the police did take the case, the issue is in the hierarchy of the Japanese legal system, who only viewed the case as a quasi-rape due to the fact that Noriyuki had been intoxicated at the time. To make matters even worse, the police had encouraged her to simply just drop the case, where they proceeded to close it anyway after an initial investigation, failing to even test her for any substances in her system. It wasn't until Ito had shared her story to the media that the case had picked up headlines. She eventually went on to become the international face of Japan's Me Too movement, leading her to win her lawsuit damages nearly 2 years later. And while Ito's victory is certainly a sign of change happening within Japanese society, it often brings up the question, how many others will get this lucky to have the resources or influence to bring light to their situation? While conformity, teamwork, and perseverance can certainly lead humanity to achieve incredible feats, there will always be a need for individuals to challenge the notions society has set in place.
What about your family? It must have been difficult for them as well. How did they react?
It was quite difficult for them, and they didn't want me to do it in the first of all, of course. And but I had to tell them, well, then who's gonna do it?
Psychology has shown us that individuals often reach conclusions without critical reasoning or evaluation of alternatives. It allows us to avoid conflict, to feel part of something much larger. But there's a real danger in that kind of mindset. The result is an underlying stigma against mental disorder, individuals who are afraid to talk about their problems, and inactivity by those who have the power to change it. While the idea behind Muteki no Hito is certainly one to be admired, bring attention to the individuals of Japan who are being neglected, to open up discussion, it is not a term that I can say I actively support. It is a term that has been popular in describing individuals who are unmarried, unemployed, or irregular employees. Of course, only for the individuals who hold a strong sense of despair or discontent with society, but for how long? Hasn't history taught us enough that placing a label on a group of individuals is bound to lead to discrimination? I hope it goes without saying, but the purpose of this video is not to paint Japan in a negative light. This video comes out of a place of respect for a nation of people that I frankly adore. As someone growing up in the States in their 20s right now, I can't begin to tell you how frustrating it is to have such little power to solve the issues that plague it. To have your opinion feel so insignificant. I imagine growing up in Japan right now is just as equally as frustrating, if not more. But I want Japan to learn from our mistakes. So you might be asking yourself then why Ubnub, living on the other side of the world, do I need to know about this obscure Japanese slang term I've never even heard of before? I live every single day of my life in fear. Fear that today will be the last day of my life. That I will end up like one of those victims that I see on TV every single month. Or I'll get that dreaded call that my family, my friends, or my significant other was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here's the thing about mass murders. You never think that it's gonna be you. You get into the mindset that you're safe behind your monitor, or when you go into spaces that you've been going to every single day for the past several years. But didn't those victims think the same exact thing? Now imagine living in a nation where your government is too incompetent to make any major changes because they view party loyalty more important than saving innocent lives. It's enough to drive anyone insane. But we do have the power to change one thing: our perspective. To never allow a term like Muteki no Hito to ever show up in the West. Watanabe himself was a large reason for the rise of this term, arguing that society needed to seriously consider how to deal with the rise of the Invincible. But even he later regretted using it, saying it was easy to explain the irrational actions and murders with just a simple term. I won't sit here and pretend that I have all the answers, but I do think the world could gain something from not simplifying killers into purely heartless monsters. Instead, we need to see them as disturbed individuals that should be examined and understood from their point of view. Because the better we understand them, the closer we can get to finding a solution that ends the hurting. To put systems in place that give people the care that they need. To show that everyone is valued and appreciated. But I think the simplest thing that any of us can do is to just give everyone a fair chance. Instead of judging someone at a surface level, take the time to learn who they really are as a person. Because you never know whose life you might be saving that day. Thanks for watching.